The hospital carried a silence that felt deliberate. Not empty, never empty, but controlled. The kind of quiet that comes from routine so deeply ingrained that even chaos seems unlikely to find its way inside. Air vents hum steadily. Monitors pulse soft green rhythms. Rubber soles whispered across polished floors. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, pale and unforgiving beneath a sun that erased shadows. Heat shimmered above the roads like something alive. Inside, everything was measured, stable. And I moved through it without drawing attention. Her steps were even, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable in the way that experienced nurses often learn, never revealing too much, never inviting questions. She adjusted an Roman 4 line in room 4 with careful precision, her fingers steady, her eyes tracking the patient's vitals without needing to look twice. "New one's quiet," one of the junior nurses had said earlier in the break room. "Too quiet," another had replied. "Makes me nervous." "A doctor." Patterson had barely looked up from his coffee. "As long as she follows protocol, I don't care if she never speaks." That had been the tone since she arrived. 3 weeks. 3 weeks in a military hospital where most people assumed they understood everyone around them. A man never corrected them. She listened, observed. She learned the rhythm of the building faster than anyone noticed. Which doors stuck slightly before opening. Which corridors stayed empty at certain hours. Which exits were used and which were forgotten. She didn't explain why she walked the building after shifts. Didn't explain why she memorized distances. Didn't explain why her eyes lingered just a second longer on entry points, corners, sightlines. To everyone else, she was just the new American nurse. Competent. Quiet. Unremarkable. And that was exactly how she intended it. In the hallway outside, 2 Navy SEAL passed by Holt and Torres. Their presence in the hospital had shifted the atmosphere slightly. Not enough to alarm anyone, but enough to remind the staff that this wasn't an ordinary facility. A man noticed them the same way she noticed everything. Without staring. Without reacting. But Holt noticed her. Not because she did anything dramatic, but because she didn't. He had spent years reading people in seconds. Most nurses moved with urgency or hesitation or fatigue. A man moved with certainty. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Just precise. "She's different," Holt muttered once to Torres. Torres shrugged. "She's a nurse." Holt didn't respond. Because something about that answer didn't sit right. Back in room 4, Emma finished adjusting the dressing. The patient thanked her quietly. She nodded once. Then she stepped toward the window. The desert stared back at her flat, endless, unchanged. Except it wasn't. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Movement. Far out near the eastern approach road. 3 vehicles. Fast. No markings. Her gaze didn't linger longer than necessary. 4 seconds. That was all it took. Then she turned away. Locked the door behind her. "Stay inside," she told the patient gently. There was something in her voice, something calm, something absolute that made the man nod without question. He didn't know why. He just knew he should listen. Emma stepped into the hallway. And then she disappeared into the service corridor. The front doors exploded open seconds later. The sound cracked through the building like a physical force, echoing through concrete, bouncing off sterile walls, shattering the illusion of safety in an instant. Shouting followed. Then gunfire. Sharp, close, real. Doctors froze. Nurses dropped instinctively to the ground. Someone screamed. "Get the Americans!" Boots pounded against tile. Weapons raised. 12 armed men moved through the hospital with terrifying coordination, faces covered, voices sharp, commands efficient. This wasn't chaos. This was planned. Upstairs, Holt reacted instantly. Torres move. They advanced down the corridor, weapons up, instincts taking over. The first engagement was brutal and fast. 2 terrorists dropped. Then another. But the attackers adjusted quickly, intelligently. Angles shifted. Return fire intensified. Torres went down first. A clean shot to the leg, severe enough to drop him immediately. Webb followed seconds later, his shoulder snapping back as he hit the wall hard. Holt kept moving. But the numbers weren't in his favor. Not anymore. He pulled back toward the stairwell, recalculating, every instinct screaming that something about this operation was wrong. Too organized. Too informed. Too prepared. And then. A sound. Behind him. He turned sharply. Weapon raised. And froze. Emma stood at the end of the corridor. Light blue scrubs. Hands at her sides. No fear. No panic. Just calm. Measured. Focused. She looked directly at the barrel of his weapon like it was nothing more than an object to be acknowledged. Not feared. Not questioned. Assessed. 1 second. That was all she needed. Then she spoke. Put that down. Cover the stairwell. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Do not let anyone through. Holt stared at her. There were still terrorists in the building. His team was down. And just a nurse was giving him orders. But something in her tone, something in the way she stood, made arguing feel unnecessary. Before he could respond, she was already gone, moving into the service corridor like she had somewhere specific to be. Like she already knew how this would unfold. Holt exhaled slowly, then adjusted his grip, and took position at the stairwell. Because whether it made sense or not, he trusted what he had just seen. And somewhere deeper in the building, Emma moved through the dim corridor without hesitation. Counting steps. Tracking space. Every movement controlled. Every decision already made. Then, a single shot echoed through the structure. Clean. Precise. Followed by silence. And for the first time since the attack began, the balance shifted. Slightly. Almost imperceptibly. But enough. Because the terrorists had prepared for soldiers. They had prepared for resistance. They had prepared for fear. What they had not prepared for was her. The corridor swallowed sound differently than the open halls. Down here in the narrow service passageways behind the hospital walls, everything felt closer, tighter. Every step echoed just enough to matter. Every breath carried weight. Emma moved through it like she had walked it 100 times. Because she had. Not out of curiosity. Not out of boredom. Out of habit. The kind of habit built long before she ever stepped into this hospital. She reached the first junction without slowing. Listened. Not for noise but for absence. There was a rhythm to movement in buildings under threat. Even trained men disrupted it. Even silence had a pattern when it was forced. She adjusted her direction slightly. Then continued. Above her, distant gunfire cracked again, short bursts controlled. Not random. Not panicked. That told her everything she needed to know. They were disciplined. Organized. And they believed they were in control. That belief would not last long. She reached the maintenance stairwell and paused for exactly half a second. Not hesitation. Calculation. Then she pushed through the door. Upstairs, Holt held position at the stairwell entrance. His world had narrowed. Every sound mattered. Every shadow meant something. Torres was breathing hard behind him, trying to stay conscious through the pain. Webb hadn't moved. Not yet. Holt didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. He replayed the last 30 seconds in his head. The nurse. Her voice. Her certainty. And the part that unsettled him most. She hadn't asked. She hadn't suggested. She had instructed. Like someone who was used to being obeyed. Another shot echoed through the building. Not from the main corridor. Not from any engagement he could see. Different direction. Single round. Precise. Holt's grip tightened. That's not one of ours, he muttered. Behind him, Torres let out a strained breath. You think it's them? He asked. Holt didn't answer immediately. Because something about that shot didn't fit. Too clean. Too control. Too deliberate. And then, static cracked through his earpiece. Weak signal. Barely there. But enough. A voice came through. Calm. Level. 2 down. Holt froze. He recognized the voice instantly. Emma. His mind processed the words faster than his instincts could catch up. 2 down. That wasn't possible. Not from her position. Not alone. Unless. He stopped that thought before it finished forming. Because if it was true, then everything he thought he understood about the situation was already outdated. He shifted his stance slightly, adjusted his angle, and waited. Down in the stairwell, the man moved upward with controlled speed. Not rushing. Never rushing. Speed without control was wasted motion. And she didn't waste anything. She reached the second floor access point and paused again. Listened. Faint movement. 2 individuals. One closer to the corridor intersection. The other slightly behind. She visualized the space instantly. Angles. Distance. Timing. Then she stepped through the door. The first man never saw her. One shot. Center mass. He dropped before his weapon finished turning. The second reacted fast. Training evident. Weapon rising. Too slow. Second shot. Silence returned. The man moved forward immediately. No hesitation. She checked both bodies quickly. Efficiently. Then removed what she needed. A radio. Extra ammunition. Information. Always information first. She pressed the radio briefly to her ear. Voices. Fragmented. Disorganized now. Good. Confusion was spreading. That meant control was slipping. She stepped back toward the stairwell. And paused. Faint shift in the air. Movement from farther down the corridor. Another hostile. Repositioning. She didn't pursue. Not yet. Because there were priorities. And she already knew where they were going. Upstairs. Toward the target. She keyed the radio. 3 down, 5 remaining. Her voice carried no strain. No urgency. Just fact. Then she moved again. Back toward Holt. When she stepped through the stairwell door, he was already waiting. Weapon raised. Eyes sharp. It's time. He didn't point it at her. He studied her. Really studied her. The way she carried herself. The way she moved. Faint blood staining her sleeve. Not panic. Not luck. Skill. Controlled. Refined. Proven. Basement? He asked. Clear, she replied simply. He nodded once. No questions. Because something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't looking at her like a civilian anymore. And she didn't need to explain why. They moved together without discussing it. Not coordinated like a trained unit. But aligned. Instinctively. He covered wide angles. She covered approach vectors. Different methods. Same objective. At the far end of the corridor movement. The remaining hostile. He turned the corner. And found himself trapped between 2 lines of fire. He hesitated. That was enough. Emma fired once. The man dropped instantly. Holt didn't even pull the trigger. He didn't need to. Silence followed again. Heavy. Thick. Unnatural. Holt lowered his weapon slightly. Exhaled. Then looked at her. You've done this before, he said quietly. Emma didn't answer. She was already scanning the hallway. Already thinking ahead. 2 left, she said instead. 1 upstairs. 1 moving toward the target. Holt followed her gaze toward the far end of the corridor. Minister Kareem's room. The objective. Of course. That's why they were here. Everything aligned now. The attack. The coordination. The speed. It wasn't random. It never was. Hostage situation, Holt muttered. The man nodded once. Then stepped forward. Stay behind me. Holt almost objected. Almost. But the words never came. Because deep down, he already knew. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't reacting. She was controlling the situation. And for the first time since the attack began, he wasn't leading. He was following. They reached the corridor outside the room. The door was closed. Solid. No visibility. No safe entry point. Holt's mind ran through options rapidly. Standard breach. Too risky. Window entry. Not viable from this angle. Time. They didn't have it. He glanced at Emma. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at the wall beside it. Then the ceiling. Then the floor. Mapping. Calculating. Reconstructing the room in her mind. Holt recognized that look. He had worn it himself. Different places. Different missions. Same process. She turned to him. One question. Position of the patient? Holt answered immediately. Bed, left side, elevated. She nodded. Once. Then stepped back. Not toward the door. Away from it. 2 meters. Slight angle. Holt frowned slightly. Until he realized what she was doing. No, he muttered. But she was already raising the weapon. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. One shot. The sound slammed through the corridor. Loud. Violent. Final. Then. Silence. A heavy thud from inside the room. And a voice. Shaking. Alive. Calling out. Holt moved instantly. Opened the door. Inside. The minister was unharmed. Still on the bed. Exactly where he said. And the last terrorist. Down. Neutralized. The angle of the shot. Impossible. Unless. Holt slowly turned back toward Emma. She lowered the weapon calmly. Checked her sleeve. Pressed against the wound again. Like what she had just done was routine. Like it was nothing. Holt stared at her for a long moment. Then shook his head slightly. Not in disbelief. But in recognition. Because now. He understood. And whatever he thought this mission was. It wasn't that anymore. Because the most dangerous person in that hospital had never been on the terrorist side. The sound of helicopters reached the hospital before anyone saw them. A deep, rhythmic thud rolled across the desert and pressed against the concrete walls, vibrating faintly through glass and steel. It was the sound of authority arriving late to something already finished. Dust lifted outside in slow spirals. Inside, the building held its breath. Holt stepped out of the minister's room and into the corridor again, scanning automatically, even though every instinct told him the engagement was over. Emma was already moving. Not toward the entrance. Not toward the command. Toward Taurus. She dropped beside him without hesitation, her focus shifting instantly from combat to care, from precision to preservation. Her hands were steady as she assessed the wound. Through, she said quietly. He's losing blood, but we have time. Taurus let out a strained breath, his face pale but conscious. He looked at her like a man trying to solve a puzzle he didn't yet have the pieces for. You're not just, he started. She cut him off gently. Stay still. Her tone left no room for questions. He obeyed. Because whatever he thought she was, it didn't matter anymore. In the distance, boots thundered through the main entrance. Iraqi special forces moved fast, clearing rooms with sharp commands and trained precision. Weapons up, eyes scanning. They expected resistance. Instead, they found silence. Bodies. Order. And something else they couldn't immediately define. Holt watched them enter the corridor, their formation tightening as they took in the scene. 12 attackers. All down. 2 SEAL wounded. Civilians unharmed. It didn't add up. A senior commander stepped forward, his presence immediate, controlled, unmistakable. His eyes moved quickly from Holt to the corridor to Emma. He paused. Just slightly. What happened here? He asked. Holt didn't answer right away. Because there were many ways to explain it. Most of them would sound impossible. He glanced at Emma. He was still focused on Taurus, applying pressure, adjusting positioning, monitoring his breathing like nothing else existed. Like the past hour had never happened. Holt exhaled once. Then said simply. One person engaged. The commander frowned. Your team? Holt shook his head. Then looked directly at Emma. The commander followed his gaze. The nurse? He asked. Holt didn't respond immediately. But his silence said enough. Across the corridor, one of the Iraqi officers approached cautiously, scanning the fallen attackers. His voice was low when he spoke to his superior. Sir, these shots. He gestured toward the bodies. Precision. Controlled. Not random engagement. The commander's expression hardened slightly. He understood what that meant. This wasn't defensive chaos. This was systematic. Deliberate. Executed. He stepped closer. Closer to Emma. She didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge him. Her world was still Taurus. Still the wound. Still the job. Who are you? The commander asked. No answer. Not because she ignored him. Because she wasn't finished yet. A medic team rushed in, finally reaching Torres. Emma shifted back slightly, guiding them with quiet instructions. Pressure here. Keep him elevated. Don't rush the transport. They followed her direction without question. Even without knowing why. Because authority doesn't always come from rank. Sometimes. It comes from certainty. Once Torres was stabilized and moved, Emma stood slowly. For the first time since the attack. She allowed herself a breath. Just one. Holt stepped closer. You okay? He asked. She nodded. That's not what I meant, he said. He looked at him then. Finally. And for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. Two people who had just seen each other clearly for the first time. I'm fine, she said. It wasn't entirely true. But it was enough. Before anything more could be said, another voice cut through the corridor. Sharp. Angry. Dr. Patterson. What is going on here? He pushed forward from the rear, his face pale but his authority fully intact now that the danger had passed. His eyes landed on Emma. On the blood on her sleeve. On the weapon still in her hand. And something in his expression changed. Not fear. Not confusion. Judgment. What did you do? He demanded. The corridor fell quiet again. Different silence now. Tense. Charged. Emma didn't respond. Patterson stepped closer, his voice rising. You broke protocol. You left your station. You engaged, he gestured sharply, this situation without authorization. Holt's jaw tightened. The commander watched. And the staff, nearby nurses, doctors, began to gather, drawn by the sound. Patterson continued. Do you have any idea what you've done? The liability alone. She saved lives, Holt interrupted, his voice low but firm. Patterson turned on him. That is not the point. It is exactly the point. Patterson's expression hardened. This is a hospital, not a battlefield. Emma spoke then. Quietly. It became one. The words landed heavily. Simple. Unarguable. But Patterson wasn't finished. You are suspended, he said sharply, effective immediately. You will hand over any equipment and report to administration for review. The words echoed. Suspended. After everything. Emma didn't argue. Didn't protest. She simply set the weapon down carefully on a nearby surface. Removed her gloves. And nodded once. Understood. Holt stared at her. You're just going to accept that? He asked. She met his gaze calmly. There are procedures, she said. Procedures? Holt repeated, disbelief creeping into his voice. You just. She cut him off, not harshly but firmly. Torres is alive. That ended the conversation. Because in the end, that was the only result that mattered to her. The commander stepped forward again, watching her closely now. Not as a nurse. Not as staff. As something else. Something he was beginning to understand but hadn't fully confirmed yet. Doctor, he said, addressing Patterson. I think we need to review. This is a hospital matter, Patterson snapped. With respect, this falls under medical administration. The commander's gaze hardened slightly. With greater respect, he replied calmly, this was a coordinated military attack. A pause. Subtle. But significant. Because authority was shifting. And Patterson could feel it. Still. He held his ground. She acted outside protocol. The commander looked back at Emma. At the blood. At the bodies. At the outcome. Then back at Patterson. Yes, he said quietly. She did. Another pause. Longer this time. And that, the commander added, may be the reason we are not counting casualties right now. The words settled into the corridor like weight. Patterson didn't respond. Couldn't, because the truth was no longer on his side. But the damage, the arrogance, had already been done. Emma turned away from them. Not in defeat. Not in frustration. But in quiet finality. She walked toward the far end of the corridor. Toward the wards. Toward the patients. Because titles, arguments, authority, none of it mattered to her. There was still work to do. And somewhere behind her, the truth was already beginning to surface. Whether anyone was ready for it or not. The hospital did not return to normal. Not completely. Not after something like that. Even as the wounded were stabilized, as floors were cleaned and bodies removed, as reports began to form in neat, official language, there was a shift in the air that no procedure could correct. People moved differently. More carefully. More aware. Because something had happened inside those walls that did not fit into training manuals or administrative policies. And at the center of it was a nurse who had already gone back to work. Emma stood in Ward 3, adjusting a saline line for an elderly patient who had slept through most of the chaos. The man stirred slightly as she checked his pulse. "You're safe," she said softly. He nodded, half-conscious, trusting the certainty in her voice without understanding why. Across the room, Clara watched her, still trying to reconcile what she had seen, what she had heard, what others were now quietly confirming. "You were out there," Clara said finally, her voice hesitant. Emma didn't look up. "I was where I needed to be." Clara stepped closer. "They're saying you stopped them." Emma secured the line, then moved to the next bed. "They're saying a lot of things. That doesn't mean they're wrong." Emma paused. Just briefly. Then continued her work. Because conversations like this, they didn't change anything. They didn't matter. Not compared to the patients in front of her. In another part of the hospital, things were unfolding very differently. The administrative office had transformed into a controlled storm. Military officials, hospital leadership, security personnel, all gathered, all talking, all trying to reconstruct something that had already been decided by the outcome. The commander stood at the center of it. Calm. Measured. But no longer observing. Now he was directing. "We have 12 confirmed hostiles," one officer reported, "all neutralized inside the facility." "And response time?" the commander asked. "Delayed. Communications interference from inside the building." The commander nodded slightly. He already suspected that. "What about internal response?" he asked. A pause. The room shifted. Eyes moved. Because this was where the story became complicated. Holt stepped forward. "I'll speak to that." The commander gave a slight nod. Holt's voice was steady. Initial engagement by SEAL team. 2 wounded. Hostiles advanced beyond expected containment. And then? Holt didn't hesitate. One individual intervened. "Name." Holt glanced briefly at the folder on the desk. Then back at the commander. "Emma." The room stilled. "Role?" another official asked. Holt's expression didn't change. "Nurse." A faint ripple of disbelief passed through the room. "That's not possible," Patterson said immediately from across the table. His voice carried the same certainty it always had, but now, it felt thinner. Less grounded. "I've reviewed the situation," Patterson continued. "She violated multiple protocols, abandoned her post, engaged in." "She eliminated 11 hostiles," Holt said flatly. The interruption cut cleanly through the room. Patterson stopped. Because there was no argument that could stand against that number. "Still." He tried. "That's not a role." The commander finally spoke. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." Another pause. Then. Which raises a more important question. He opened the thin personnel file in front of him. And frowned. "This doesn't make sense." The file was incomplete. Not empty. But deliberately minimal. Basic credentials. Medical training. Deployment volunteer. Nothing more. No depth. No history. No explanation. The kind of file that didn't exist unless someone had made sure it didn't. The commander looked up. Who cleared her for this assignment? Silence. No one answered. Because no one knew. Or more accurately, no one had asked. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. "She applied through standard channels," he said. "Her qualifications were acceptable." "Acceptable," the commander repeated. Then closed the file. "Find out everything." His tone left no room for interpretation. An officer nodded immediately and stepped out. The room remained quiet. Tension building not from chaos but from realization. Because something about this situation was no longer simple. It wasn't about a nurse breaking protocol. It wasn't about administrative failure. It was about something much larger. And it was beginning to surface. Hours passed. The hospital settled further. Night approached slowly, the desert outside cooling just enough to let shadows return. Inside, Emma finished her rounds. No announcement. No acknowledgement. Just work. Always work. She stepped into the hallway, the lights softer now, the urgency replaced with a low, steady hum of recovery. Holt found her there. Leaning lightly against the wall, arms folded, watching the corridor like he was still on duty. Which, in a way, he was. "You don't stop, do you?" he said. Emma glanced at him briefly. "People still need care." "That's not what I meant." She didn't respond. Holt exhaled. "You took down 12 men today." 11, she corrected quietly. He almost smiled. "Almost. That doesn't bother you?" She looked at him then. Really looked. "It should," she said. A pause. Then. "It doesn't." There was no pride in her voice. No satisfaction. Just truth. Holt studied her for a long moment. "You were military." It wasn't a question. Emma didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it. She simply said, "A long time ago." Holt nodded slowly. "Not that long." Another silence. Then footsteps approached. Sharp. Purposeful. The officer who had left earlier returned. File in hand. Thicker this time. Much thicker. He handed it directly to the commander. No words. Because none were needed. The commander opened it. And everything changed. The room didn't react immediately. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But something shifted. Subtle. Heavy. Irreversible. The commander read in silence. Page after page. His expression didn't show shock. Didn't show surprise. But it did show recognition. And something else. Respect. He closed the file slowly. Then looked up. At Patterson. At the others. At the entire room that had underestimated something they never bothered to understand. "She's not just a nurse," he said. No one spoke. Because they already knew that. Now. "What is she?" someone asked quietly. The commander placed the file on the table. Carefully. Like it mattered. "Former Marine Corps," he said. A pause. Then. "Sniper designation." Silence. Complete. Absolute. Because now. Everything made sense. The movement. The precision. The calm. The decisions. Not luck. Not instinct. Training. Refined. Proven. Tested in places far worse than a hospital corridor. Patterson sank back slightly in his chair. His earlier certainty. Gone. Replaced by something far less comfortable. Realization. The commander continued. 2 deployments, attached to reconnaissance units. He didn't elaborate further. He didn't need to. The room understood what that meant. This wasn't theory. This wasn't potential. This was experience. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that doesn't leave. "And she volunteered for this posting?" another officer asked. The commander nodded. "Yes." "Why?" The commander glanced down at the file again. Then answered simply. "Because she knew what this place might need." Silence followed again. This time. It wasn't confusion. It was clarity. And across the hospital. Unaware of the conversation unfolding about her. Emma continued her work. Unchanged. Unmoved. Because who she had been didn't matter to her. Only what she chose to be did. And that was something none of them had understood. Until now. The truth did not spread all at once. It moved quietly at first. Through closed doors. Through controlled conversations. Through the kind of voices that carried weight without needing volume. By morning the atmosphere inside the hospital had shifted again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was awareness. Not everyone knew the full story. But enough people knew enough. And that was all it took. Emma arrived for her shift at the same time she always did. No escort. No announcement. No change in routine. Light blue scrubs. Hair tied back. Calm, steady presence. The hallway conversations softened as she passed. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Unspoken. Unforced. Different. Clara noticed it immediately. You feel that? She whispered as Emma checked the morning charts. Emma didn't look up. Feel what? Clara hesitated. Then said it anyway. They know. Emma paused briefly. Then continued writing. That doesn't change anything. Clara studied her. Because that response. It wasn't humility. It wasn't denial. It was something deeper. Something more grounded. As if the recognition of others held no weight compared to the responsibility she carried. Across the hospital, things were unfolding in a very different way. Dr. Patterson sat in the administrative office again. This time, he wasn't in control of the room. The commander stood across from him. File in hand. Open. Every page now understood. You suspended her, the commander said. Patterson shifted. Yes, she violated. She prevented a mass casualty event. The words landed harder this time. Because now, they carried context. Patterson tried again. That may be true, but there are procedures. There are results. Silence. Sharp. Clean. Final. The commander stepped closer. Not aggressive. But absolute. You made a decision based on incomplete understanding, he continued. Patterson's jaw tightened. And you made a decision based on hindsight, he countered. The commander didn't react. Because that argument. It didn't hold. Not here. Not anymore. He acted where others hesitated, the commander said quietly. Patterson didn't respond. Because he remembered. The locked room. The shaking hands. The waiting. While she had moved. While she had acted. While she had decided. Another officer stepped forward. Her record has been verified, he said. Full clearance confirmed. Commendations, classified beyond our level. Patterson closed his eyes briefly. Just for a second. Because that confirmed what he already feared. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had judged her. Dismissed her. Punished her. The commander closed the file. She returns to duty, he said. Patterson nodded slowly. But something inside him had already shifted. Because authority can be reassigned. But credibility. That takes longer to rebuild. Meanwhile, the story began to leak. Not officially. Not through reports. Through people. A nurse who had seen her in the corridor. A medic who had counted the bodies. A soldier who had heard the radio. It only took one voice. Then another. Then another. He moved like she knew exactly where they were. They didn't even see her. It wasn't panic, it was planned. Within hours, the story reached beyond the hospital. By the next day, it reached beyond the country. But inside the hospital, Emma remained exactly the same. She adjusted a patient's medication with the same care. Spoke to families with the same calm reassurance. Walked the same corridors. Unchanged. Because for her, nothing had changed. Holt found her again near the end of her shift. Leaning against the wall outside recovery. Torres had come out of surgery. Stable. Alive. Because of her. She's asking for you, Holt said. Emma looked up. Torres? He nodded. He's been asking since he woke up. Emma stepped into the recovery room quietly. Torres lay propped up, pale, but conscious. His eyes found her immediately. You're real, he said. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't humor. It was genuine. Emma stepped closer. Checked his monitor. Vitals are good, she said. Torres let out a slow breath. You saved my life. Emma didn't respond. She adjusted the Roman 4 line instead. You did, he insisted. She met his gaze briefly. You held on, she said. That matters too. Torres shook his head slightly. No, that's not the same. Emma didn't argue. Because she wasn't there for acknowledgement. She was there for care. Holt watched from the doorway. Then stepped in. You could have left, he said. Emma glanced at him. You didn't. That's different. She tilted her head slightly. Is it? Holt didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew it wasn't. He stood in silence for a moment. Then Holt asked. Why nursing? It wasn't curiosity. It was respect. Emma looked at Torres. At the steady rise and fall of his breathing. At the life that was still there. Then said, "Because it's the part that stays." Holt frowned slightly. She continued. "Everything else ends. Combat. Missions. Orders. All of it stops eventually." She looked back at him. "His." She gestured lightly to the room. "To them. This doesn't." Silence followed. Not heavy. Not tense. Just understood. Because for the first time, Holt wasn't trying to define her. He wasn't trying to categorize what she was. He simply accepted it. Later that evening, the entire staff was called to a brief meeting. Unusual. Unnecessary. But important. The commander stood at the front. Patterson beside him. Different now. Quieter. Measured. The room settled. Eyes moved. Waiting. The commander spoke first. "What happened here yesterday will be documented in official reports." A pause. "That will never fully capture what actually occurred." He looked across the room. At the doctors. At the nurses. At the people who had hidden. And the one who hadn't. "There are moments," he continued, "when titles don't matter. When roles don't define capability. When the person you least expect becomes the one who carries everyone else." His gaze found Emma. She stood near the back. Unassuming. Unmoved. This hospital stands today because someone acted when others couldn't. No applause. No dramatic reaction. Just silence. Respectful. Real. Patterson stepped forward then. Took a breath. And said, "I was wrong." The words were simple. But heavy. Because they didn't come easily. "I judged based on appearance," he continued. "And I failed to recognize what was in front of me." He looked directly at Emma. "That will not happen again." Emma nodded once. No satisfaction. No resentment. Just acceptance. Because for her, this was never about being right. It was about being ready. And when the moment came, she had been. That was enough. The hospital returned to rhythm. Not the same rhythm as before, but a quieter, more aware version of it. The kind that comes after something has been broken and understood. Footsteps echoed, a little softer, in the corridors. Voices carried a little more weight. And people, without realizing it, looked at one another differently. Not by title. Not by rank. But by something harder to define. Emma walked through it all unchanged. Morning light filtered through the high windows, casting pale gold across the polished floors. Monitors beeped steadily. Carts rolled. Life continued. Because it always does. She stepped into room 4. The same room. The same patient. The same routine. She checked the dressing carefully, her movements precise, controlled. "You were here yesterday," the patient said quietly. Emma nodded. "Yes." He studied her. "They said something happened." She secured the bandage. "Something always happens," she replied. He smiled faintly. "That's not what I meant." Emma met his gaze for a brief moment. Then said, "You're healing well." And that was the end of it. Because she wasn't there to tell stories. She was there to make sure people survived theirs. Outside, the desert wind had softened. The harsh heat of the previous days had eased just enough to let the air move again. Dust drifted slowly along the edges of the compound. Life continuing. Inside, Holt stood near the main corridor, watching her from a distance. Not like before. Not analyzing. Not questioning. Just observing. Respectfully. Torres joined him, walking slower now but steady. "You still trying to figure her out?" Torres asked. Holt shook his head slightly. "No." Torres raised an eyebrow. "No?" Holt glanced toward Emma. "I think she already figured everything out a long time ago." Torres followed his gaze. "She could have stayed in that world," he said. "You know that." Holt nodded. "Yeah." "She didn't." Another nod. "Yeah." Torres exhaled slowly. "That says more than anything else." Holt didn't respond. Because he agreed. Completely. Across the hospital, a young nurse approached Emma hesitantly. The same one who had spoken to reporters. The one who had seen her sitting calmly after everything was over. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Emma looked up. "Yes." The nurse hesitated, then asked, "Were you ever afraid?" It was an honest question. Not curiosity. Not admiration. Just human. Emma considered it. Not quickly. Not casually. Then answered, "Yes." The nurse seemed surprised. "But you didn't look afraid." Emma adjusted the chart in her hands. "Looking afraid doesn't help anyone." A pause. The nurse nodded slowly, trying to understand. "Then how did you keep going?" she asked. Emma looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment, there was something softer in her expression. Not vulnerability, but recognition. "Because someone needed to," she said. The nurse lowered her eyes. That answer stayed with her. Because it wasn't heroic. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. And that made it heavier. Later that afternoon, the commander prepared to leave. Convoy ready. Reports filed. Official closure approaching. But before he stepped into the vehicle, he paused, turned back, and walked inside one last time. He found a man near the nurse's station. Same place she had been days before. Same posture. Same quiet focus. He approached without urgency. "You chose this," he said. It wasn't a question. Emma glanced up. "Yes." He nodded once. "There are places that would make different use of your skills." Emma didn't respond immediately. She finished writing in the chart, set it down, then said, "There are always places like that." The commander watched her carefully. "Yet you're here." Emma met his gaze. "This is where I'm needed." No hesitation. No doubt. Just truth. The commander studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Understood." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing." Emma waited. "You didn't just save lives that day," he said. "You changed how people here will see each other." A quiet pause. "That matters." Emma didn't respond, because she hadn't done it for that. But she understood. And sometimes, that was enough. He left. The convoy rolled out, dust rising behind it. And just like that, the outside world moved on. But inside the hospital, something stayed. Something quieter. Something lasting. That evening, the staff gathered informally in the break room. No announcements. No agenda. Just presence. People who had shared something they didn't yet have words for. Clara sat beside Emma. "You could teach, you know," she said. Emma glanced at her. Clara continued. "Not just nursing, all of it." Emma considered that. Not dismissing it. Not accepting it. Just considering. "Maybe," she said. Clara smiled slightly. "I'd attend that class." Emma almost smiled. Almost. Across the room, Patterson stood near the doorway, watching. Not as a superior. Not as someone in control. But as someone learning. Finally, he stepped forward. Slowly. "Emma," he said. She turned. "I meant what I said earlier." She nodded once. "I know." He hesitated. Then added, "I'm still learning." Emma held his gaze. "That's enough." And for him, it was. The hospital lights dimmed slightly as evening settled in. The corridors quieted. The steady rhythm of care continued. Unseen. Uncelebrated. But constant. Emma stepped out into the hallway one last time before her shift ended. She paused near the window. Looked out at the desert. Now calmer. Still vast. Still endless. But no longer silent. Because somewhere inside that building, a truth had been uncovered. Not about her, but about everyone. That strength doesn't always announce itself. That experience doesn't always introduce itself. That the person standing quietly in the corner may be the one holding everything together when it matters most. Emma turned away from the window. Walked back into the hospital. Into the work. Into the purpose she had chosen. Not for recognition, Not for redemption, but because it needed to be done. And she would always be the kind of person who did what needed to be done. Quietly. Completely. Without asking anyone to notice. Because some heroes never do. And maybe that's the point. If this story stayed with you, like, subscribe, and comment what you would have done.